dew point and your wind speed outside in real time. It's kind of cool to watch that.
Yeah. Brad and I are probably the same people on the airplane that you're watching Netflix or whatever on the screen, and we've got the map. In fact, I saw a meme the other day on Twitter, and it was the guy. He's got the map on the seat screen, and then he's got his laptop up with a better flight tracker, and he's just like monitoring the situation.
I'm always amazed how cold it is out there. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's minus 47 degrees. It's like crazy cold outside, you know. Sometimes even colder. Yeah, that's really cool. So we've got another question here. Tim, I'll let you read this one. This is a good question, actually.
Okay, here we go. Is there any way that the warm nose will disappear, or at least could be a thinner nose, or a thinner zone at least? It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think when we get to this point in the storm, we're thinking about what do we know that's locked in and what's a little more durable and what's a little less durable. I think at this point in time, and just knowing the Carolinas weather that we do, it's very rare that the level of warmth above our heads is underestimated, it's very rare that it's overestimated.
Yeah.
Usually the models are underestimating how much warmth we have above our heads. Obviously, a couple days away, anything could change. But I would be floored if that warm nose shrunk a lot or went away. That would really surprise me. Just the trends that we watch, usually the cold air wedge is a little stronger than expected, and at the same time, that warmth above our heads is also a little stronger than expected. That's why a lot of our snow forecasts in the past have busted when you turn to sleet too early. It's a little rare to turn to sleet too late, in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think that's where the hurricane hunter down in the Gulf is going to help us out, because that's kind of the location the warm nose would be coming from. So I think it's going to give us a good hint at that. You're right, Tim. We have a lot of weather data from the surface. I mean, everyone's got a backyard weather station, airports, Doppler radars. We don't have a lot of information above our heads. We got to rely on the aircraft and the upper air data. So if there's going to be an air, it's going to be above our heads. And there is definitely some wiggle room, and that's probably the $1 million question, because that will be the difference between freezing rain and sleet. I don't think it goes away. I think the thickness is what we don't know, Tim, and the duration of that thickness, that will be the hardest part.
I think so too. I do have this graphic pulled up. I think I showed it yesterday, but Jeb, if you wanted to punch it up, it has 2 lines on here. So this is Sunday afternoon. It's not perfect. It doesn't line up exactly with the precip type, but it's good enough. That's going to be your 32-degree line in yellow above our heads, about 3,500 feet or so in the air. So that's where it's above freezing. I was actually looking at one of the computer models. It forecasts above Greensboro to be about 45 degrees Sunday afternoon. And we're going to be in the 20s here at the ground. And so that's just one model's opinion. But it's a dramatic warm nose. And if people don't even know what a warm nose is, that's just that level of warmth above our heads where it isn't usually. Typically the air cools as you go up with height. This is different in this type of situation.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Tim. I was looking at BuffKit, which is a program I use to look at soundings, and I noticed that same thing, like up around 4,000 or 5,000 feet above Charlotte. It was like 10 degrees above 0 Celsius, which is super warm. And then about 400 or 500 feet above the ground, it was 10 degrees below Celsius. It was like this crazy cold air near the surface. I had just never had seen such a difference within 5,000 feet. And that's what makes this storm so unique, and also why we're so worried about it, because that means a lot of liquid is falling into cold, cold, cold air.
And it's harder to refreeze that warmer liquid into a sleet pellet if that's what you're trying to do too. So there's a lot to be concerned about for sure.
Yeah, so one last tip. We're almost out of time here. We're just going to give you the emergency supplies. You got time to prepare out there. The good news about the slower approach of this, Tim, is I think people that worked and don't have a lot of time to prepare today and tomorrow, you might have Saturday. If it's your day off, you will have the morning to go. Now, I would not go to Costco Saturday morning on a good day. I certainly would not do it this weekend because it is going to be crazy. So be safe out there, everybody. We'll have more coverage tomorrow, and there's more WCNC Plus coming up.
Thanks for sticking along with us here on WCNC Plus, guys. We're going to continue with our weather, headlines, I should say, and go to Governor Josh Stein as he is preparing all of North Carolina to get ready for the storm now.
We are expecting winter weather to return to North Carolina this weekend. It will impact the majority of the state. In some parts of North Carolina, kids might experience their first real snow, and I can remember when my kids would look forward to the snow days. They'd watch TV and wait to see Wake County schools scroll at the bottom of the screen, and then we would go sledding over at Dorothea Dix Park. And I hope that some parents who are watching this can make special memories of their own with their kids. But winter storms are not just fun and games. For much of the state, folks will see ice instead of snow. And whether you find yourself facing ice or snow, we've all got to be prepared for whatever impacts may come. Yesterday, I declared a state of emergency across North Carolina to get ready for the storm. We've activated the State Emergency Response Team, which is a cross-agency group that includes the Department of Transportation, the Department of Public Safety, the North Carolina National Guard, the State Highway Patrol, and our state's utilities. Soon you're going to hear from North Carolina Emergency Management Director Will Ray about the winter storm and our emergency response operations, and then from Secretary Daniel Johnson about NCDOT's work to keep our roads as safe as possible. As Director Ray will outline, this winter storm will likely impact the majority of the state. At this time, our greatest concerns are potential power outages and road safety over the coming days. Ice accumulation may lead to power outages, and we recommend everyone keep their devices charged, have a flashlight and battery-operated radio on hand, and think about what you may need to stay warm and fed if you lose power. Precipitation and freezing temperatures may also make a mess of our roads, even with the 300,000 gallons of brine that NCDOT has already put down. Thawing and refreezing leads to black ice, so everyone needs to be careful on the roads for not only during the storm, but for a few days after the storm hits. Please avoid driving unless it is necessary to travel. This will keep you safe and the roads clear for first responders and anyone else who must be on the road. Some communities may open warming stations for those who need a safe refuge from the cold temperatures. You can find information on resources in your community by visiting your local government and emergency management agency's website and social media accounts. This morning, in addition to Director Ray and Secretary of Transportation Johnson, I'm also joined by Secretary of Public Safety Jeff Smythe, Major General Todd Hunt of the North Carolina National Guard, and the Commander of the State Highway Patrol, Colonel Freddie Johnson. Jackie Mativier and Mary Lee Bahar are our Spanish language interpreters, and our American Sign Language interpreters are Stephen Holland and Abby Quick. As we stand here now, emergency management officials, Department of Transportation crews, State Highway Patrol troopers, and the National Guard are hard at work preparing for the winter weather, brining the roads, pre-positioning resources, clearing abandoned cars from the shoulders of our highways, and working closely with local governments across the state to coordinate assistance quickly. High clearance vehicles are ready to support stranded drivers. The Forest Service is ready to remove downed trees from roads. Aviation assets, planes, helicopters are ready if needed. During winter weather, just like in any severe weather situation in our state, our number one priority is to keep people safe. So we recommend that you take the following actions to navigate this winter weather event. First of all, stay informed. Make sure you're following your local media, the National Weather Service, and your local emergency management agency. Second, get prepared. Think about what you would need during and after a major storm. Things like enough water, non-perishable food, medication, and supplies for 3 to 5 days for each person and pet in your household. Also, a flashlight, fresh batteries, a way to keep your phone charged, blankets, and winter clothing. Visit readync.gov for more detailed information about how you can best prepare. Next, make a plan. How will you safely heat your home if the power goes out? How will you cook safely if the power is out? And what will you eat if cooking is not an option? Where will you go if you cannot stay at home? Finally, let me repeat this. Starting Saturday, please do everything you can to stay off the roads. Unless you're a first responder or essential personnel, please don't drive unless you have to drive. Fortunately, we have 2 days to make sure that we have everything we need to ride out this storm. Don't wait until it's too late. And if as you're getting ready, don't forget to check on your loved ones and neighbors and anyone who might be especially vulnerable, including the elderly. None of us can control what this storm will ultimately look like, but each of us can get prepared. Be ready to stay home for a few days, potentially without power, and know that we are taking this storm seriously and we will do everything we can to keep you safe. Thank you. I'll now invite forward and turn it over to Director Ray.
Thank you, Governor, and good morning, everyone. I want to begin this morning with the forecast as we have it currently, and then provide an overview of our operational posture. As the Governor said, while there are still 2 days before this winter storm impacts North Carolina, confidence in the forecast continues to increase that this will be a significant event covering most of the state. Winter storm watches have been issued for most of the state, with impacts from this storm expected to last into early next week. The most impactful precipitation remains over the weekend, where a wintry mix is forecast across much of the state. Light precipitation is forecast to begin early on Saturday, spreading from west to east. The primary precipitation types include some snow, sleet, and accumulating freezing rain, with the best chances of any accumulating snow being in our northern counties. Our partners at the Weather Prediction Center have placed a probability of 60 to 90% for much of the state to experience moderate impacts. These impacts include hazardous driving conditions, especially on bridges and overpasses, damage to tree limbs from ice accumulation, and power outages that have the potential to be long-lasting. Portions of the state may experience major impacts, especially in the southwestern North Carolina, which can include considerable disruptions to daily life, with dangerous and often impassable driving conditions, as well as widespread power outages and damage to trees. As a reminder, ice accumulations of around a ½ inch of ice or more can cause an increase in downed trees or impact power lines and lead to an increase in power outages, as well as to hazardous travel conditions. Bitterly cold temperatures will move into much of the state Saturday and will last into Tuesday at this time. There are several important reminders if you lose power during this storm. Please ensure that generators are operated outside and away from open windows or doors to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. Never burn charcoal indoors or use a gas grill indoors. Properly vent kerosene heaters and make sure that all heaters have space around them to reduce fire risk. Use battery-powered sources of light instead of candles to, again, reduce fire risk. And make sure that you have plenty of warm blankets and clothing available. Based on the current forecast, hazardous travel conditions are expected Saturday and Sunday and may remain for several days due to the lingering low temperatures. As the Governor stressed, we would ask all North Carolinians to finalize preparations by Friday night and plan to stay off the roads this weekend. Unnecessary travel not only puts you at risk, but also the public safety personnel, power crews, and DOT workers who are working to respond to emergencies, to restore power, and to clear roadways quickly. If you must drive in winter conditions, our partners with the State Highway Patrol advise reducing speed significantly, increasing the following distance between you and other vehicles, and clearing all snow and ice from your vehicle before traveling. Given the forecast, let's make their work easier by staying off the roads unless absolutely necessary. The State Emergency Response Team has been activated here at the State Emergency Operations Center, as well as at our regional coordination centers in Kinston, Burlington, and Hickory. Key partners such as the Department of Transportation, the North Carolina National Guard, and the State Highway Patrol, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services, are working to address any resources or support that is requested by our local communities. We've also activated our warehouses in Burlington and in Baden and Stanley County. As of this morning, the State Emergency Response Team has provided water, meals, medical supplies, and heating equipment to local communities or partners who have requested that support. We're mobilizing elements of the North Carolina National Guard over the course of today and tomorrow to be able to assist with stranded motorists, assisting first responders with their emergency response, roadway clearance, and commodity distribution. Additionally, we are placing aviation assets from the North Carolina National Guard and the State Highway Patrol on standby for any rescue or movement of critical resources and personnel into impacted communities as this storm moves out of the state later this weekend and as conditions allow. Hotspot crews are being deployed along our major roadways, primarily in western North Carolina, along I-40 in Clyde, I-40 at Old Fort in McDowell County, on the Saluda Grade in Polk County, along I-77 and US 321 at Turner Grade in Surrey County. As a reminder, these are combination teams of the NCDOT and North Carolina National Guard to ensure safe movement and address stranded vehicles from along our major roadways. These teams will be moved around those impacted areas as needed. The North Carolina Forest Service from the Department of Agriculture will be activating personnel and equipment to assist communities with tree removal from roadways as necessary to ensure both public safety access and general support to those communities. Strategic communications personnel and equipment are being positioned to assist with ensuring communication pathways are sustained and quickly restored if impacted. Our partners at the North Carolina Office of Emergency Medical Services are monitoring the needs of our healthcare community across the state, particularly our licensed care facilities and hospitals, to quickly address any needs impacting patients. We will continue to work with the entire state emergency response team, our local and state governments, the private sector, and our nonprofit and volunteer partners as the forecast continues to evolve to ensure we can support the 11 million North Carolinians. As we go into the weekend, it is imperative that, again, all North Carolinians are prepared with a personal preparedness kit of food, water, flashlights, batteries, and a plan to stay warm if you lose power. For preparedness information and checklists, as the governor said, please visit readync.gov. Finally, please check on your friends, your family members, and your neighbors or those in your community who may need additional support this weekend. We are stronger and more resilient together. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Governor and Director Ray. North Carolina Department of Transportation has been preparing for this storm all week. Our crews and contractors have been busy over the past several days, pre-treating roads, preparing their equipment, and rebolstering our supplies of salt. As noted before, the latest forecasts show a widespread event that's likely to spread ice throughout the state of North Carolina, and an event that has the potential to impact all roads in North Carolina. Some locations could see winter weather like they haven't seen in years. For these reasons, this storm has our full attention. We have more than 2,100 specially trained employees available to respond to the storm. More than 1,100 of those employees have already been hard at work pre-treating the roads. They've pre-treated thousands of miles of roads with over 300,000 gallons of brine. We also have 1,250 dump trucks that can be fitted to clear snow and ice. We've got 913 contract trucks that are prepared and 217 motor graders on standby. We are staging some of that equipment in areas that are known trouble spots during the winter storm. And we have more than 150,000 tons of salt to treat roads and are actively securing additional salt to replenish supplies throughout the storm. If the current
All right, folks, we have two breaking news stories we're going to update you on right now. We just got from Mecklenburg County within the last 30 minutes that there were 2 measles cases confirmed. We've been talking about the spread both in South Carolina and in North Carolina. In fact, in the upstate, things have really gotten out of control in terms of the cases, confirmed cases that they're seeing from measles. So this is what the Public Health Department is saying. They're investigating confirmed cases, 2 in an adult who was a contact to a confirmed case of measles via travel. That adult is recovering at home in isolation and contacting investigation processes is continuing here. And the public health then is investigating a case of measles in an unvaccinated Mecklenburg County child who had been in contact with a child from Spartanburg, South Carolina, where there's a measles outbreak of over 600 cases ongoing. That child is recovering at home in isolation, and the contact investigation process is ongoing in that as well. Apparently, health leaders will hold a virtual media update. That'll happen tomorrow. More details are going to follow. But according to the CDC, the latest numbers are that there are 2,144 confirmed cases of measles in the United States. That was in 2025. Several cases have been confirmed so far in North Carolina in 2026. And as you just heard me say, specifically in Spartanburg, more than 600 cases. So things are really rising here in terms of measles, as we have told people that doctors are saying, and specifically from this, it says that the MMR vaccine is one of the biggest ways to stop the spread of measles. So again, if you see any symptoms, you should call your doctor immediately or go to an emergency department as soon as possible and let folks know that are around you. Of course, the MMR vaccine is widely available at healthcare providers and pharmacies across Mecklenburg County. If you need to find any other information, we'll of course put it over up on WCNC.com. Excuse me. Now, our second bit of breaking news is happening in Salisbury, and police just putting this out at 7:30, saying that they're conducting a homicide investigation. That approximately at 11:30 a.m., Salisbury Police Department responded to a report of an unresponsive man who was found in the bushes beside a home near the intersection of South Shaver Street and East Hurrah Street. Upon arrival, officers located this adult male at the reported location. The fire department showed up, EMS responded to the scene, and the victim was pronounced dead at the scene. They identified this person as Landis Darnell Glaspie. The date of birth is 1971. He has been unhoused and living on the streets of Salisbury for several months prior to this incident. They are finally now notifying family at this time. So there's very preliminary information on this, but it is being investigated as a homicide, and detectives from Salisbury Police are actively working on this case. Remains ongoing. It says that they're not going to be releasing many more details as that could hamper the investigation, which we hear pretty usual from police departments when there's an active investigation ongoing. We're going to go and take a 2-minute break. Of course, we'll come back right after this with more information and more news here on WCNC Plus. Need a little time. All right, folks. Hey, we're going to go to this story that really has captivated the United States over the last 24 hours. There was a child, a 5-year-old, that was detained by ICE, and people are speaking out. In fact, the lawyers for this individual are speaking right now. Let's go to this.
I just want to talk a little bit about what happened and then go in from there. Zena and Mary may have more specific details about what happened since I came in the next day to look at the legal perspective of this. Back up a little bit as far as perspective. Liam and his dad did enter the United States at a port of entry to seek asylum through the CBP One app at the Brownsville border crossing. So they did everything right when they came in. They used the app, they made an appointment, they came to the border and presented themselves to Customs and Border Patrol. They've shared all of their information with the government, and they were following the process. They were just trying to secure safety and persecution for their family from their home country. But ICE didn't care about the fact that they had those pending claims and then just arrested them. And again, Zena and Mary can go through the details of that if you have questions about that. My big concern here is that, the fear that was generated, the terrorizing of the children and the community, that's just horrifying. But we've now learned through the help of Senator Tina Smith that Liam and his dad are in San Antonio, Texas, at the Dilley facility. Any people that were remembered the children in cages from 8 years ago, that's where the government holds family units. We know that detaining children and families is wrong. Immigration violations are civil in nature, and so how can you justify incarcerating a child because of a civil violation, which again is not even accurate here because they entered lawfully through the CBP One program. And this family was not eluding ICE in any way. They were following all the established protocols, pursuing their claim for asylum, showing up for their court hearings, and posed no safety, no flight risk, and never should have been detained. A couple of things also that we'd like to make known. According to the Wall Street Journal, officers are being rewarded for making arrests, even if the immigrants are later released. So this is reprehensible. This is basically giving ICE officers that ability to just go pick anybody up because then they get their little bonus. So for years, we've been speaking out about the inhumane practice of detaining families seeking asylum. Detention of families, parents, children who pose no flight risk, no danger to the community, is simply inhumane and unacceptable. Family detention is harmful to children and their families. It inflicts mental health trauma, subjects people to inadequate medical care, and prevents them from accessing legal counsel. That's why they were flown down to Texas. Our laws are clear. If you express a fear of returning to your home country, you have the right to a credible fear screening, and if you pass the credible fear screening, you have a right to pursue your asylum claim before an immigration judge. And that's where we are at. We are in the process of pursuing our asylum claim. Being detained, it impedes their ability to work with their attorneys. It makes it more difficult to obtain the evidence that they need to support their claim, and finding expert witnesses and all of that help to support their claim. And lastly, just a couple of things about the ICE enforcement that we've been seeing in Minneapolis. Law enforcement operations, they must prioritize public safety and respect for civil rights. This rapid buildup of enforcement it's clearly sacrificed proper training, and there are diminished standards for the work being done. Putting armed personnel in the field with insufficient preparation, it just raises the likelihood that things are going to go badly. So we're urging lawmakers and agencies to review those policies governing enforcement actions. we must be avoiding targeting or endangering ordinary residents, immigrants, our friends, our neighbors. And we've seen what happens now. There have been multiple violent encounters, including these federal agents, and in multiple cities, and that's just not acceptable. And finally, we do recognize the need for immigration enforcement, but it must be measured, accountable, proportional, not endanger communities, and lawful. And with that.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Zena Stenvik, Superintendent for Columbia Heights Public Schools. A little bit about Columbia Heights Public Schools. We educate and care about all of our students. Our top priority is the safety of our students, staff, and their families. Our mission is to create worlds of opportunity for each and every learner where all belong and all succeed. Our focus is on educating our children, not politics. Everyone who passes through our doors is a valued member of our community. Over the last few weeks, ICE agents have been roaming our neighborhoods, circling our schools, following our buses, coming into our parking lots multiple times, and taking our kids. So over the last few weeks, I've kept my head down and focused just on supporting our school district, our families, our students, our staff. But as of this week, 4 of our students have been apprehended and taken away by masked and armed ICE agents with no identifying badges. So we decided it was time to speak up and share what's actually going on. The onslaught of ICE activity in our community is inducing trauma and is taking a toll on our children, taking a toll on our families, our staff, our community members. This surge has changed nearly everything about our daily lives. It's clear to me that there are multiple paths immigrants take legally to live and work in the United States, such as sponsorship, seeking asylum, refugee status, or temporary work permit, among others. You're the expert. The young boy Liam and his father, who were taken yesterday, have the documentation. I saw it with my own eyes when I visited the home. With that, I'll turn it over to Chair Graham.
Thank you. Hi, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Mary Grandlin, and I serve as the school board chair for Columbia Heights Public Schools. Our city is known as a city of peace, and it was named an All-American City in 2016. We are a small working class community. I've lived there for almost 20 years, and it's a pretty great place to live. And our children should not continue to be surrounded by masked agents brandishing large guns in our neighborhoods and at their bus stops. We want to thank our community and the staff for all of the extra time and energy they've been dedicating to our impacted students and their families on top of their everyday duties. We're lucky to live in a place where the community has wrapped their collective arms around our neighbors. From elected officials to clergy to teachers to community leaders to moms and dads and uncles and aunts, and big brothers and big sisters, and our local police department and first responders. Everybody has worked really hard to continue to make Columbia Heights as safe as it can be during this time. But we've also learned who keeps us safe. We keep us safe. The sense of safety in our community and around our schools is shaken, and our hearts are shattered. And honestly, at the end of the day, children should be in school with their classmates. And we want to focus on the purpose of educating our children. That is why we are here. That is why I was elected. Our schools and communities must be safe places for children and families to thrive. And we need a diplomatic pathway out of this situation. And we are seeking a peaceful resolution, and we need your help. Because at the end of the day, we have whistles, and they have guns.
Thank you. We'll take time for some questions now, and if you can, ask who you're directing the questions to. Again, Mark, Mary, Zena, so that we can each respond appropriately.
Mark, can I ask you a couple of things? One is, I wanted to just put in your ear, I don't know if you heard this, what J.D. Vance said and the way he described what happened with this family. He said that he went and looked up and researched what happened. He said, what I found was that a 5-year-old was not arrested, that his dad was an illegal alien, and then they went to arrest his illegal alien father, and the father ran. So the story is that ICE detained a 5-year-old. Well, what were they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let a 5-year-old child freeze to death? That's how he described what happened. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, what I'll do is we'll tag team on this answer. So I will answer that, as I said, these are not illegal aliens. They came properly, they came legally, and are pursuing a legal pathway. So that's just not accurate. As far as what actually happened, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Yeah. So I was on my way to get my own children from school, and I heard the commotion and saw all the people. And as I got out of my car and came around the corner, I heard, "What are you doing? Don't take the child." His mom, like, there are people here that can take him. There was another adult who lived in the home that was there saying, "I will take the child, I will take the child." Somebody else was yelling, they saw that I was there and said, "School is here, they can take the child, you don't have to take them." And there was ample opportunity to be able to safely hand that child off to adults. And mom was there, she saw out the window, and dad was yelling, "Please do not open the door, don't open the door," because of the other picture that I'm sure you've seen, where there's a little boy knocking at the door with an ICE agent looming over him.
And just the second question is, are you accusing ICE of using children as bait?
Yes, I mean it's very clear from the pictures, from the videos, from firsthand accounts. I was there. This is what happened.
Can I say too?
Yeah.
One thing we know to be true, because again we've had 4 students taken, and at least one of our 17-year-old students who was taken, when she cracked open the door, the agents pushed their way in and then apprehended the child and whoever was else in the apartment. So it's been, unfortunately, over the last few weeks, pretty common knowledge about not opening doors because they're pushing their way in, or I'm sure you've all seen multiple examples of like not tearing down doors, which is something that we had happen in Columbia Heights today at a home of 5 of our children.
Mr. Mark, just to be clear, have you had any contact with the boy or his father since they were taken into custody? Or
We've not had direct contact. We've had indirect contact. We've been trying to set up calls with the Dilley facility, but it's notorious to get that call time. So we're working on it, and we've had indirect contact.
And just to clarify, were you working with this family on their asylum case before this incident, or were you just called in afterwards?
I was just called in afterwards. I've been working on this for 36 hours.
Mark, can you tell us whether the family, whether the father and son, do you know from the conversations you've had with Senator Smith or other, whether they're being held together or if they've been separated at the facility?
I believe that they're being held together because that's the point of the Dilley facility. It's a family holding center. But I can't 100% confirm that, but I believe that they are together.
For the superintendent, DHS is pretty forcefully online responding to articles both locally and from international outlets that are taking your words about this situation and calling those journalists, and by extension you, liars about this incident. To the best of your knowledge, do you know if their version of events is accurate in the idea that Dad ran away when ICE was there and Liam was left alone in the driveway?
So I haven't seen any of those articles at this point, so I don't have that background. I will say there were when I arrived on scene shortly after Mary was there were several people on scene. So when I exited my vehicle, I immediately said, "Where's the child? Where's the child?" That's what I was there to do, is to collect the child and return them safely to school. And so there were people there videotaping or videoing it. I wasn't there. I would perhaps, our local officers in Columbia Heights Public Schools, they all wear body cams. So perhaps the ICE agents could share their body cams or review their body cams, and they can actually show on video what happened. So we have photo, there were bystanders there, we have video.
Follow-up question to that. DHS in a statement said that the mom refused to accept custody of the child and that the dad insisted that the child go with him. Have you had any communication with the mom to corroborate whether she did say she wanted to keep the child, or if what DHS is saying is true, that she refused to accept custody of the child in this situation?
So when we entered the home, it was really to provide support to the mom. She was obviously very distraught, very terrified. It wasn't an interview type situation for her. We were just there to provide support. I've heard that that the father perhaps. I've heard that there's accusations that he perhaps fled. Everything I've heard is that he was handcuffed in the driveway. And what we saw when we arrived on scene was the father's car in the driveway still running. Mm-hmm. So the car wasn't turned off. So.
And then just a quick question for Mark. You said that they legally came to the United States, are applying for asylum. What year was that when they came to the U.S.?
2024.
Is that the entire family or just Dad and Liam?
Well, right now I'm focused on Dad and Liam.
And where originally are they from?
I'm sorry?
Where are they from?
Ecuador.
Question for each of you, if it's okay. Mary, if I can start with you. Nicole Scango with CBS National News. It sounds like you were saying school is here when you first saw ICE agents taking the father into custody. Were you agreeing to accept the child, and can you describe the scene in which other adults were ready and able to take that child?
For sure. So when I arrived, another community member, again, we're a very small community, so we know our neighbors very well. And somebody else saw me and said to the agents, "School is here. The school is here. They can take him." And I said, "Yes, I'm here. I am here. I can help with that."
You offered to take him, and you saw ICE agents drive away with the 5-year-old boy.
Yes. And then I held another community member in their front yard sobbing.
Liam's mother was inside the house?
Did they, when you asked them why they were doing that, did they say anything, talk to you?
So, I don't remember if they did say anything back to me. There was a lot of yelling, and there was a lot of people, making a commotion. And so all I can speak to is the part that specifically that I heard and my response.
Sorry, to clarify, Liam's mother was inside the house?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, did she say she wanted her child? Was she clearly, obviously saying, just leave him with me?
Again, I was not at that door when that was, as they were putting him in the vehicle and leaving.
Question for Mark. DHS officials have said that the father abandoned this child. How does that differ from what your understanding is? You said that they were being held at Dilley. What is your understanding of the conditions in which they're being held? Do you know if Adrian Conejo Arias has any sort of criminal record to speak of? I understand you were saying he was in the asylum process.
Sure, I'll take those in reverse order. To my knowledge, I had looked through the Minnesota criminal database and found nothing. So no, there's no crimes here that the family has ever done. And just to go back, so they are, again, Dilley is a family detention center, and I don't know the exact conditions. We have people that are going to be going and trying to visit them there to
You
check
think they're being held together, but you don't know for sure?
Correct. I do not know for sure. I'm assuming so because the federal regulations require that. So I just have to assume that they are following those regulations.
And just lastly, for Zena, you described how 4 different children have now been taken into custody by ICE from your school district.
Correct.
What is the feeling right now among students, among parents, among teachers? And can you describe the scenes that you alluded to earlier of ICE agents in parking lots and circling school buses?
Sure. ICE agents came onto our property, our high school property, yesterday afternoon when we were preparing to speak, and obviously we have school district video of that. My understanding is they were on site for about 10 minutes, and what they did is they came into our parking lot and then went into, we have an enclosed loading dock, so you sort of have to go under a portion of the building, which they did, to an enclosed loading dock. There were some staff members out there, some admin, who spoke with them and asked them if they had any business there, and eventually they left after about 10 minutes though. And so unfortunately, right above that loading dock, there's a large bank of windows, and a lot of our students were up there and saw it. And so I think there's a video. Some student put something on social media.
Watched ICE agents outside their
yes,
school.
because it happened during passing time. So students were in the hallway.
Question for Mark. What are the odds that they're able to come home even if they continue to face some sort of legal scrutiny over their asylum case?
So we're looking at our legal options to see if we can free them either through some legal mechanism or through moral pressure. So we're hopeful. We have to be hopeful.
Mark, is the mother, did she not come out because she was concerned she would be grabbed by ICE, or do you?
I would presume that, yes.
Mark, I just have a question for you and then the superintendent as well. Do you know if Liam's parents had DOPA forms and who was listed on them, whether it was a family member, a relative, friend? And how, as a school district, are you set up to handle situations where minors' parents are detained? Is that something where you have policies in place where school district representatives can take custody of the child? Are you legally able to do that if you're not listed on the DOPA form?
I don't know yet if they do, because again, I've only been working on this for about 36 hours and we've had more pressing issues, so that's the next level of our communication with the family for that.
Do they have other children?
I'm going to finish that question. Our school district started working on this a year ago, actually, and there are community law firms that came in pro bono and provided Know Your Rights trainings to our families and provided those DOPA forms to our families. So those are available out there for people to take. Generally, they're not listing school district staff as the recipient. There's generally someone else. I have gotten some inquiries about would that be okay, and so of course we have to follow school district policy and state law and all of that. And but I think the comment about would we take Liam into our custody, we wouldn't take him into our custody at the scene, but we could take him back to school and care. And that's, that has been typical of anytime after school when a parent is late to come picking their child up or something like that. We can hold on to the child until we find, because of course we have the emergency contact list. We would know who to contact if a parent isn't available.
Just for clarity, you have said that you believe that ICE is using children as bait. How so, and in what way are you saying that they were trying to use the child to get the mother to come out to take her into custody? And have you seen any other situations where they've allegedly used children as bait?
I haven't seen any other situations in that case, but when I came on scene to assess the situation, that's the information that was relayed to me. If you watch the videos that are out there, there are 7, 8 agents all around. I would infer that the mother was probably fearful to open that door, and I've heard on the video the husband telling her to not open the door for fear. So the husband could see what was happening. He was right there. We all seen the photo of the agent there. So, yeah.
But that's what you mean by using as bait, by knocking on the door and trying to get the mother to come out.
Correct.
Do you have any knowledge if the family has any plans to go to Texas to see them or try to get in personal contact with them?
At this point, not yet. Again, I'm focused on this urgent need of a 5-year-old in ICE custody. Right now, that's my focus.
What do you want people to know about this family, about Liam?
Well, we had the opportunity to talk to his preschool teacher yesterday, and she said he was just a wonderful child, a great student, that she and the classmates miss him. my quick, assessment of the family, when I walked in to the house, immediately to the left there was a huge teddy bear, and lots of things available for children to play with, things that you would expect to see. So that really struck me and caught my eye when we walked in. Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about the other 3 students who were apprehended?
So I'm not releasing names. I don't have permission to release names. One was a 10-year-old child who was apprehended with her mother on their way to elementary school. She had been with us since she was in kindergarten and is now in 4th grade. So just imagine, think back to your kindergarten teacher, right? Kindergarten teachers love their children forever and ever. And so all of the teachers in that school were shattered. It was a very difficult day, and then it happened again and again and again. So the other 2, I mentioned the 17-year-old in the apartment, and then on the same day that Liam was taken, that morning, a 17-year-old boy was taken from his car on his way to school. The kids just want to come to school. They want to be in school. We want them in school. They want to be in-person learning. They thrive. They're happy in school. So it's like Mary said, it's a really nice community, tight-knit community. Yeah.
Can you say more about that incident you were mentioning, busting down the door with 5 students?
I don't have a lot of information. It happened today, and I can verify it because one of my principals went to the address to check on the family, that the door was broken down. I believe it might be a multi-family unit, and so when I looked up the address, I have 5 students currently residing at that address.
The other 4 students detained, do you know what their status is, where they are, if they're still in custody, if they...
The other 3 students detained? I know that the 10-year-old was taken to Texas as well. I don't know which facility. And the 17-year-olds, I don't know.
Mark, can you speak to the asylum request by this father and son? What were they fleeing in Ecuador? What were the circumstances based on your understanding?
That I'm not willing to talk about because asylum claims are confidential.
Do we know if Liam's mom is a U.S. citizen?
I'm not sure I'm ready to talk about that either. Right now I'm focused on getting Liam out of ICE custody, but thanks for the question.
You speak to the fact that they're in Texas right now. How challenging does that make this for you versus if they were detained somewhere closer? And you alluded to this earlier, but why do you think ICE officials moved so quickly to transfer them to Texas?
I just saw a report that just in Minnesota in the past few weeks, immigration lawyers have filed over 300 habeas petitions in the state of Minnesota. And with a habeas petition, you have to file it in the jurisdiction where the detained person is. And it makes it a lot harder for lawyers to file habeas petitions in Texas when we're up here in Minnesota. And so that's presumably the strategy for moving them that quickly. When I'm dealing with the courts, I can work with the courts from a distance, but when I need to communicate with my clients to talk them through the process, that's where it gets difficult. So if they live in Texas, that's fine. I can communicate them by phone, Zoom, email. But when they're detained, I'm at the whim of the detention facilities controls about when and how long I can talk with them.
Have you already filed a habeas petition?
No.
Or do you plan to?
That's part of our legal strategy. We're working on the best solution for them.
Can you talk about some of the kids? Can you talk about some of the kids? Like, what are they asking the teachers? Are they noticing their classmates' absence? What are they asking you guys?
So we are trying to provide a normal school day as best as we can for children. It is challenging. There are children who are absent. The other week, I had to direct staff to hold indoor recess instead of letting children out because there was ICE activity, and of course now there have been gunshots in the state of Minnesota when there's ICE activity, and so if it's happening near our playgrounds, I will bring them in so that there's no risk for our children. So I went over to that school and talked with some of the kids, and I did have a child who's maybe 4th or 5th grade say, "Are we having inside recess because of ICE?" And so even our youngest children are aware of what is happening all too well. I mean, they see it, we see it far too often on a daily basis in our community.
Well, Superintendent, I know that we've talked about the Vice President's comments here, but while he qualified it by saying he knows that it's always a difficult situation when a child is involved and mom or dad are both, in his view, need to be arrested by law enforcement. He acknowledged that's tough. But he also effectively said that he didn't have a problem with how this went down once he did research into this specific issue. What would your response to him be if he's listening to you tonight?
We've had 4 children taken from my school district, and that's far too many. That's 4 too many, right? We would like to focus on teaching children and providing learning opportunities for children. That's our main focus. So I don't get into the politics. We really just want children to be reading and writing and learning science and all of the subject areas. And so that is what prompted me to speak out, is because I had heard that the approach was supposed to be targeting hardened criminals or violent criminals, and that they weren't targeting children. But when I see them at bus stops and circling my schools, like up and down the street, I have seen it with my own eyes, the same people.
In gear, in tactical gear.
Yeah. So that's what prompted me to speak out. I mean, I this isn't what I aim to do. I just aim to be taking care of our children, right? And I would like to be able to do that. And when children and their families and my staff are fearful, I'm telling you, it's really taking a toll.
Have there been any clashes between, I drove past the school today and there are police everywhere. Have there been any clashes between local authorities and federal agents?
Not to my knowledge. I don't represent the police department, but not to my knowledge.
Not that I've heard either.
Are you in touch with other school districts that are dealing with this? I mean, you're obviously the first to publicly acknowledge this, but what has that conversation been like?
Yeah, actually the superintendents here in the metro area and across the state of Minnesota are very close. We have a Minnesota Association of Superintendents organization that works together, and we definitely have these conversations. My understanding is that Senator Kunesh will be having a press conference on Tuesday at the state capitol and has invited school officials to be there.
Superintendent, you talked about keeping kids inside during recess because of ICE activities. We've heard, of parent patrols outside of schools. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on outside of your schools during arrival and dismissal times? Have you had to call in local law enforcement to help with that? And also earlier this month, the governor said that he was considering whether there should be a state presence at schools to help ensure students get to and from school. Is that something that you would want to see the state take action on?
And I'll just say that'll be the last question.
Thank you, Kristen. So I communicate regularly with our local law enforcement. They mentor and coach our basketball team. They have open gym with our students. They do cooking competitions with our students. So we're in regular communication, and they're very supportive. And at the same time, we understand what the line is: local police department versus federal immigration, right? They're around because we have a youth outreach officer whose office is in a city-owned portion of our gym, I guess is the best way to describe it. So they are around on a daily basis. Particularly our one officer, who is a graduate of our high school, by the way, very proud. With his therapy dog. We do have parent volunteers who have, of their own accord, chosen to be more present at arrival and dismissal. We also have had a number of staff who, again, of their own choosing, have been present, more present at arrival and dismissal.
And as for the governor's proposal?
Last question.
Yeah. Just in terms of the piece about earlier this month, the governor suggesting a state presence, is that something you would welcome?
What I'm requesting is a peaceful resolution to the situation. So I'm not requesting state officials to come to the school district. I'm requesting that we find a peaceful resolution out of this situation. Diplomatic and peaceful. That's what I'm requesting.
Thanks, everybody, for your interest. And
2-minute break. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break and come back right after this. All right, everyone, welcome back. We actually just got a Governor Stein update. He will be providing more information on the approaching winter storm tomorrow morning at 11:30 a.m. We had Governor Stein talking today. He'll talk tomorrow, providing those updates on winter storm preparations and any other guidance. Obviously, he declared a state of emergency that impacts all of us, but allows for more resources and a lot of operations to really kick up into high gear. So we'll get more from him tomorrow at 11:30 in Raleigh, and of course we'll stream that live here on WCNC Plus. Let's go to Vice President J.D. Vance, who held a press conference not too long ago.
You had a couple of ICE officers who were off duty, who had been doxxed online, who were sitting and having a meal at a restaurant in Minneapolis when a bunch of agitators showed up, locked the door, made them feel like they were in danger for their lives, and then, of course, it was federal law enforcement officers who had to come up, lower the temperature on the situation, and actually get those two off-duty officers to a point of safety. Now imagine, if you would, your life and your perspective on law enforcement if you can't even go to a restaurant without some agitators locking the door and making you feel like your life is in danger. That is the environment that has been created, I think, by a lot of very, frankly, far-left people, but also by some of the state and local law enforcement officials who could do a much better job in cooperating and working. And by the way, I'm not talking about the cops, who these guys told me on the ground, the cops are very sympathetic to what they're dealing with. I'm talking about state and local elected law enforcement officials who could do a lot better job in making their lives a little bit easier, and in the process, they would make the lives of all Minneapolis residents easier, and that's what we want. We want to be able to enforce the immigration laws on the one hand, while on the other hand, we want to make sure that people in Minneapolis are able to go about their day. And I want to say just one last point on this. So, I heard from a business leader today who told me a very tough story, and I think so much of what's gone wrong in Minneapolis is people not trying to understand the perspective of somebody else. Try to understand what somebody else is experiencing, whether they're a law enforcement officer or anybody in the community here in Minneapolis. So they told me a story about this manufacturing facility where an illegal immigrant was being arrested. And as these employees are going into the manufacturing facility, all of a sudden an illegal immigrant shows up. They don't know it's an illegal immigrant. And then a bunch of ICE officers descend. Now, these people just want to go to work. They want to go to work safely. And now all of a sudden there's a major law enforcement operation happening right outside their place of business. Now, from one perspective, I certainly understand why a business leader or why an employee would say, whoa, what's going on? It's a little scary, no matter your position in life, if a bunch of cop cars show up and they're arresting somebody. Now, the additional context is that we know that people online have been encouraging illegal immigrants that one way they can evade arrest is by showing up at a legitimate place of business, making it impossible for these guys to actually enforce our immigration laws. So while I can understand the perspective of somebody who doesn't want to see an arrest happen at their place of work, I can also understand the perspective of our immigration enforcement officers who have to do their job and can't allow a heckler's veto over our immigration enforcement. And so much of what's gone wrong is the failure to do that. And here's the point. We can do a good job of enforcing our immigration laws without the chaos, but it actually requires the cooperation of state and local officials. If you look at blue cities and blue states, red cities and red states, you go to Austin, Texas, or Memphis, Tennessee, you go to the state of Texas, obviously a very red state, or the state of Tennessee, a very red state, but you've got blue cities within those states, you do not have this level of chaos. The reason why things have gotten so out of hand is because of failure of cooperation between the state and local authorities and what these guys are trying to do. We have a ton of resources, a ton of ICE agents in this city right now that I would rather us not have. I'd love to send those guys home. They're not even doing targeted immigration enforcement. They are trying to protect ICE officers who are doing immigration enforcement, because when a crowd surrounds them and these guys call 911, the local officials, the local cops have been told to stand down. So we have people here who aren't even doing immigration enforcement, they're doing force protection, so that if a rioter tries to ruin the life or assault an ICE officer, they're actually protected. Now, why doesn't it make more sense for the local cops to get involved in that situation? Why not just have the mayor or the local officials tell the police officers, you know what, if an ICE officer is being assaulted by a far-left agitator, you are invited, you should actually help them. That's what would work out in any normal situation, and that's what happens in nearly every jurisdiction, red or blue, in the United States of America. The reason it hasn't happened here is because the local authorities have been told, stand down, do not help ICE, promote the violence, promote the agitation, but don't do anything to lower the temperature and lower the chaos. That's a problem. Here's another example of how the lack of cooperation between state and local officials makes it harder for us to do our job and turns up the temperature. Let's say, for example, we have a criminal migrant who is a sex offender, and let's say that we've got to go and arrest that person who, Democrat or Republican, wants a sex offender living in their community. I would assume, I would hope that most people don't. But because they're an illegal alien, we don't know their last address. We may have known their address 3 years ago, but we don't know their address now. What we'd like to do is talk to local officials and say, you know what, according to the Medicaid rules, where was the last address this person was domiciled? Or according to a SNAP application, a food stamps application, maybe that could give us insight to where this person is today. Or maybe they had some local court trouble. We could go to the local courthouse or even the local jail and try to find where this criminal sex offender is today. The local authorities have been told, do not cooperate. So these guys are trying to go out and enforce the law. They're trying to arrest sex offenders, but they're trying to do it in an environment where local officials have been told, do not help them, do not provide intelligence about where these sex offenders might be. This is disgraceful. And there are a lot of things that all of us could do better to lower the temperature, but the number one thing that I learned today is that the best way to facilitate reasonable enforcement of the law, but also to lower the chaos in Minneapolis, would be for state and local officials to cooperate. Now, I will say, on one final positive note, I actually think that there's some hope, some reason to think that there's going to be better cooperation in the weeks and months to come. I think that because I've talked to some of the local officials here. I think there are reasons to believe that these people are going to step up and actually ask the cops to protect our ICE officers when they're being assaulted, who are going to ask the local courts to cooperate with getting criminal sex offenders out of our community. That's a good thing. That's the good news, and that's something I'm going to work on when I get back to Washington. But please, if you're a local official, if you're the mayor of this town, if you have any influence over those people, just tell them to cooperate. Because we could have immigration enforcement operate as smoothly and without the chaos that we see in Austin, Texas, or Memphis, Tennessee, or even rural parts of the state of Minnesota. All we need is a little cooperation. I guarantee we're going to do the best to be professional, to respect people's rights, to not do anything that we don't have to do in order to enforce immigration laws, but it would make our lives a lot easier, it would make our officers a lot safer, and it would make Minneapolis much less chaotic if we had a little bit of cooperation from the state and local officials. With that, I'll shut up and take some questions. Thank you, guys.
Vice President Pence, a local school district here is alleging ICE agents detaining a 5-year-old after preschool on Tuesday. We've also seen multiple American citizens detaining by ICE or harassed by ICE in the last 6 weeks. Are you proud of how your administration is conducting this immigration crackdown here in Minnesota right now?
Well, I'm proud of the fact that we're standing behind law enforcement, and I'm proud of the fact that we're enforcing the country's laws. But, you asked a question about this 5-year-old kid. I actually saw this terrible story while I was coming to Minneapolis. We just left Toledo, Ohio this morning for an economic messaging event. And I see this story, and I'm a father of a 5-year-old, actually, a 5-year-old little boy, and I think to myself, oh my God, this is terrible. How did we arrest a 5-year-old? Well, I do a little bit more follow-up research. And what I find is that the 5-year-old was not arrested, that his dad was an illegal alien, and then when they went to arrest his illegal alien father, the father ran. So the story is that ICE detained a 5-year-old. Well, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let a 5-year-old child freeze to death? Are they not supposed to arrest an illegal alien in the United States of America? If the argument is that you can't arrest people who have violated our laws because they have children, then every single parent is going to be completely given immunity from ever being the subject of law enforcement. That doesn't make any sense. No one thinks that makes any sense. Now, there are so many of these cases like that where if you just understand the context, there have been a number of situations that I've looked into personally where I say, wait a second, we don't want ICE arresting American citizens. They're supposed to be enforcing the immigration laws against illegal aliens. So then I look into it and I find out that the American citizen who was arrested took a swing at an ICE officer. You can't have that happen. And of course they have to defend themselves. And of course they have the right to detain somebody who assaults a law enforcement officer. Now, this is my point. Do we want these things to happen? Do we want these arrests to be so chaotic? No, we don't. These guys want it least of all. But if we had a little cooperation from local and from local and state officials, I think the chaos would go way down in this community.
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
After the Renee Good shooting, sir, the administration seemed to suggest...
Yeah, well, you can go next.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you pointed it
No,
out.
that's fine. I'll take both.
After the Renee Good shooting, sir, the administration seemed to... After the Renee Good shooting, the administration seemed to suggest that ICE officers enjoyed near complete immunity. But today you told the Washington Examiner that when appropriate, the administration might take disciplinary actions against ICE agents. So is that a change of opinion? And if so, why the change in tone?
No, I didn't say, and I don't think any other official within the Trump administration said that officers who engaged in wrongdoing would enjoy immunity. That's absurd. What I did say is that when federal law enforcement officers violate the law, that is typically something that federal officials would look into. We don't want these guys to have kangaroo courts. We want them to actually have real due process, real investigation, because again, sometimes they're accused of wrongdoing, and it turns out when you learn the context, they didn't actually do anything wrong. But of course we're going to investigate these things. Of course we're investigating the Renee Good shooting, but we're investigating them in a way that respects people's rights and that ensures that if somebody did something wrong, yes, they're going to face disciplinary action, but we're not going to judge them in the court of public opinion. I've spoken at length on this particular case. I think that Renee Good's death is a tragedy. I also think that she rammed an ICE officer with her car. So the tragedy here is multi-layered. The tragedy is there was a misunderstanding. The tragedy is that Renee Good lost her life. The tragedy is that you have ICE officers who are going into communities where they're worried that if they call 911, no one's going to come to help them. That is what produces this terrible situation, and it's something state and local officials here in Minnesota could solve.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Could you give us a message towards March for Life tomorrow, especially regarding the cooperation and family values? It's a shame the kids have to get caught up in all this, and towards that, sir.
Well, it is a shame that kids have to get caught up in this. I'm speaking at March for Life tomorrow. I'm pro-life, and I'm very excited to speak there. I want to talk about local law enforcement, but I am. As a child, I saw people in my family get arrested. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking, it's chaotic, it's traumatic for the kids. I can recognize that, and I can recognize that we got to support these kids, while on the other hand saying that just because you're a parent doesn't mean that you get complete immunity from law enforcement. And I think we have to hold both of those thoughts in our head at the same time. We've got to be sympathetic to the kids who are caught up in some of these enforcement actions. We've also got to say we have to enforce the law without bias, with fairness, but we've got to enforce the law.
Mr. Vice President!
Speaking about local government, there was a class in Power a few weeks ago, and their mayor said they haven't heard about ICE in the city. And how does ICE kind of proactively work with these local agencies? What are those policies, and what's your response to that?
You said there was an altercation in St. Cloud.
It's an hour north.
Yeah.
After the incident, the mayor said that ICE did not communicate with them if they were in the city for a major operation. The police chief did not know about the operation at the time. Could you talk a little bit about proactive communication with local law enforcement?
Yeah, it's one of the takeaways. I've talked with these guys before we came on the stage, but during our roundtable and some of the other conversations we've had. Communication, we absolutely want to ensure there's good communication between federal officials and state and local officials, and I'm sure that we can do better on that. We absolutely want to make sure that we are communicating, but that also requires a two-way street, and that's the point that I make about state and local officials. These guys will absolutely communicate with state and local officials. They'll tell people if they have to do an enforcement operation in a particular municipality, but part of that is they also want to ensure that if they're communicating about their whereabouts, that's not being used as a weapon against them. Sometimes they tell people where they're going, and then they find out that their agents' faces are on on Reddit or on some social media thread saying, here's this guy, we know he's going to be at this place at this exact time. So that communication has got to be a two-way street. These guys are going to communicate with business leaders, with local officials, with state officials, but we also need the local officials and state officials to do a good job of protecting people when they're in their communities. We're not asking, by the way, we don't want any police officer in this community, in this state, to help us do immigration enforcement. We've got that. But if a protester shows up and that protester turns violent against our immigration officers, we really, really need the cooperation of our local partners. We haven't gotten it yet, but I think if we do, we really can lower the temperature. Yeah, so I saw that story, and the story is like so much that I read in the mainstream media. It's missing a whole lot of context, and when you appreciate the context, it makes sense. No one is saying, look, there are exceptions. For example, a crazy exception, if somebody is fired at from inside a house, they don't need a warrant to go inside that person's house. There are very narrow exceptions to the warrant requirement where law enforcement officers don't need a warrant if, for example, they're an imminent threat of their lives. But what we've said and what ICE has proposed, what the Department of Homeland Security really has proposed in the Department of Justice, is that we can get administrative warrants to enforce administrative immigration law. Now, it's possible, I guess, that the courts will say no, and of course, if the courts say no, we would follow that law, but nobody is talking about doing immigration enforcement without a warrant. We're talking about different types of warrants that exist in our system. Typically what happens, not always, but typically in the immigration system, those are handled by administrative law judges, so we're talking about getting warrants from those administrative law judges, and then of course, with other cases, you get judges, or you get warrants from a judge. That's very consistent with the practice of American law. I'm sure the courts will weigh in on that, but we're never going to enter somebody's house without some kind of a warrant, unless, of course, somebody's firing on an officer or they have to do something in order to protect themselves.
Do you believe that you can forcibly enter with an administrative warrant, or would that be a violation?
Well, our understanding is that you can enforce the immigration laws of the country under an administrative order if you have an administrative warrant. That's what we think. That's our understanding of the law. That's our best faith attempt to understand the law. Again, this is something courts will weigh in on. I won't speak to that. But yes, most immigration law in our country is not done through the criminal system with the judge. It's done through the administrative law system. We're going to continue that practice just as they did in the Biden administration or any other administration.
Was there anything that you heard or saw today that would cause you to contact the president to invoke the Insurrection Act? And then also, did you meet or talk to the ICE agent who was involved in the neighborhood incident?
I did not talk to him today. I talked to some of his colleagues. Your question on the Insurrection Act is interesting. I've tried to understand this as well as I possibly could. And my understanding is what the Insurrection Act, what invoking the Insurrection Act would allow the federal government to do is that it would allow the federal government to use the military for local law enforcement operations. Right now, we don't think that we need that. Now, the president could change his mind. Of course, things could get worse. But right now, we think that federal law enforcement officers can do the job of federal law enforcement. Now, what I do worry about, again, is if the chaos gets worse, if more and more ICE agents start getting assaulted, if other law enforcement officers start getting assaulted, that would be a real problem. But again, we have so much federal law enforcement resources here right now. We have so many people here that we do not want to have here. I do not want so many ICE officers in Minneapolis right now. I mean, good Lord, it's really, really freaking cold outside. But they're here not even to enforce immigration laws, but to protect the people from the rioters. That's an absurd state of affairs, and we wouldn't need it if we had a little bit more cooperation from the Minneapolis Police Department. Again, the Minneapolis Police Department, my understanding is that the actual beat cops on the ground, they would love to help out, but they're being told by somebody, I don't know if it's Mayor Frey, they're being told by somebody not to cooperate at all. What kind of a person tells their local police don't protect somebody if they're being assaulted by a rioter? It's crazy, and it's got to stop.
Earlier this week, local law enforcement accused federal agents of racial profiling. Why are there so many U.S. citizens being caught up in this operation?
Well, I think your question assumes something that's not necessarily in evidence, which is that when there are American citizens who have been caught up in some of these enforcement operations, very often it is people who have assaulted a law enforcement officer. They're not being arrested because they violated the immigration laws. They're being arrested because they punched a federal law enforcement officer. That is a totally reasonable thing. Now, to the accusation of racial profiling, look, it's something that we take very seriously. We will take accusations of racial profiling back to Washington. We'll certainly look into them as they come up. But this is not a group that's going around and looking for people who violated the law based on skin color. They're looking for people who violated the actual law, the law of our immigration system in this country. And so long as we had more cooperation, I think they could do these things in a much more targeted way. They would actually know where some of the bad guys are. I mean, again, you hear things that are hard to believe, but I've confirmed that they're true. Sex offenders who we're trying to get off the streets, who the local officials won't tell us their last known address. So then the local officials say, oh my God, these guys are doing widespread targeted enforcement operations when in reality, we would love to just go to one house. The local officials won't tell us which one house to go to.
Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, to that question, the local police chiefs have said their own off-duty officers, so police officers, are being targeted because they are a person of color and asked to show their papers. Is that a concern of the administration of the Department of Homeland Security if local law enforcement says their own officers are being targeted and they described it as, quote, civil rights violations in our streets?
So I saw one story about this and one local police officer who said this. And look, certainly is it a concern? Absolutely. The first thing we have to figure out is whether it happened or not. And then if it happened, whether there is a good explanation or a bad explanation. And of course, if somebody violated the law, if somebody racially profiled, if somebody violated the rights of one of our fellow citizens, that is something we will take very seriously. What I also would say is that many of the most viral stories of the past couple of weeks have turned out to be, at best, partially true. So we want to try people based on reality, based on the truth, based on context. We're not going to prejudge people just because of a viral social media story that turned out to be half false.
Mr. Vice President, a quick question. About the roundtable you just had, I presume that happened. Did you invite anybody with an opposing point of view to get an idea of why people are upset here. And just as a quick follow-up, have you reached out to Governor Walz at all in an attempt to turn down the temple?
So I haven't talked to Governor Walz on this particular trip. A number of members of our administration, I believe our chief of staff, spoke to the governor and has been in constant contact with his staff over the past week. We've been in my office in constant contact with people here on the ground in Minneapolis. There were certainly people at our roundtable with opposing views, and look, I don't even know, whether it's public, but yes, we met with people with opposing views here at the roundtable. I wanted to get a perspective from everybody, but also, of course, offer my opinion that with a little bit more cooperation, we can lower the chaos. We're going to keep on doing that. If Governor Walz wants to call me, we'll absolutely continue talking. I will say that my sense of this situation, having talked to these guys for a long time, is this is primarily a law enforcement issue. This is the Attorney General. This is the local mayor. This is all of the organs of local and state law enforcement. That's who we focus on, but we've certainly been in communication with the governor and his office as well.
Yeah. So local law enforcement obviously hasn't been really helping out with the agents who've been assaulted repeatedly. What's the plan if nothing changes there here locally and this operation has attracted thousands of agents? Are there any plans to go to any other cities from here?
Well, right now we're focused on Minneapolis because that's where we have the highest concentration of people who have violated our immigration laws, and that's also, frankly, where we see the most assault of our law enforcement officers. I mean, our plan is very simple. If you assault a federal law enforcement officer, we're going to do everything that we can to put you in prison. It's very simple. And most of these protesters, as much as I may disagree with their politics, most of them have been peaceful, but a lot of them have not been peaceful. And if you go and storm a church, if you go and assault a federal law enforcement officer, we are going to try very hard. We're going to use every resource of the federal government to put you in prison. Respect people's rights. Respect people's rights to worship. Respect people's rights to do their job without being assaulted. If you follow that basic principle, the Trump administration is going to do everything that we can to protect your rights. But if you go after somebody, if you assault somebody, if you make a 9-year-old girl cry because you walked into her church and harassed her, we're going to go after you with every single tool that we have.
Your administration has said repeatedly this is about safety, about making Americans feel safer. So what do you say to people here in Minnesota who say it's the overwhelming presence of ICE officers and federal officers and their tactics that are making them feel less safe?
Well, one thing I would say is, first of all, we saw in 2025 the biggest one-year drop in murders in the history of the United States of America. Significant reductions in violent crime. The reason why we have less violent crime is really two reasons. Number one, because we're enforcing the immigration laws and getting very violent criminals out of our country. And number two, because we're enforcing our criminal laws and putting guys who assault and murder behind bars. This is part of a broad effort to make us safe. And the chaos that people are seeing, and I understand there is frustration of the chaos, I'd say that we're doing everything that we can to lower the temperature, and we would like federal and state and local officials to meet us halfway.
Are you saying that they're not perceiving it correctly? Are you saying that they're not seeing that it's the tactics or the presence of the officers that are...
Look, I'm sure that people are seeing a lot of things that would make any member of our national community feel very upset, but I also think that if you understand this in context, this is the inevitable consequence of a state and local government that have decided that they're not going to cooperate with immigration enforcement at all. In fact, they're going to aggressively not cooperate. So here's a basic illustration of this. If you are an ICE officer and you have to arrest a person who's committed assault and is also an illegal alien, but the state and local officials won't help you identify that person, many of the things that people in Minneapolis are seeing that give them pause, that frustrate them, that worry them, that make them feel like things are too chaotic, many of these things are coming from the fact that there's no cooperation with state and local law enforcement. And I guess what I would tell people, again, many of whom are justifiably concerned and worried about what they're seeing in their communities, is why are we not seeing it anywhere else? We're seeing this level of chaos only in Minneapolis. LA and Chicago, we had some problems there. Pretty much every jurisdiction where these guys are operating, you don't see the same level of chaos. You don't see the same level of violence. You don't see the problems that we're seeing in Minneapolis. Maybe the problem is unique to Minneapolis, and we believe that it is. And it's a lack of cooperation between state and local law enforcement and federal law enforcement.
CNN. ICE has been operating here for years with less pushback than we're seeing right now. And even the St. Paul police chief recently said, is there not a way to find common ground without scaring the hell out of people in the community? Those are his words. And I just wonder, with this Operation Metro Surge, is any part of it meant to send a form of political message to the leaders here in Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota? And I know you talked about you've been in touch with the governor's offices and the mayor's offices, but why have you not been able to speak to them directly? Have they not been willing to do so?
Well, look, I have spoken to some of the people in Minnesota directly. I spoke to some of them today. I've spoke to others in the past. And again, our staff has been in very direct contact with pretty much every official with any influence or any power in Minneapolis. But no, we're not trying to send a political message. We're trying to enforce the law. And unfortunately, what has happened is that as we've enforced the law, there's been this weird reaction, again, unique to this city. This is not a common thing across the United States of America. There's been a very unique, very Minneapolis-specific reaction to our enforcement of federal immigration laws. What I'm trying to do here today is understand why that is. What is it about Minneapolis that has become so chaotic? What are the specific types of cooperation that we need? Look, I don't need Tim Walz or Jacob Frey or anybody else to come out and say that they agree with J.D. Vance or Donald Trump on immigration. I just don't need that. What I do need them to do is empower their local officials to help our local or help our federal officials out in a way where this can be a little bit less chaotic and it can be a little bit more targeted. Like if we're trying to find a sex offender, tell us where the guy lives. Simple things like that, simple changes in how they're approaching immigration enforcement would make this work a lot better. It would make Minneapolis' streets a lot safer, and it would make this whole thing a lot less traumatic for this community. I'll take one more question.
Mr. Vice President, you've said that it's time to turn down the temperature. Does that include changes to both ICE and CBP tactics that we've seen employed on the streets, including less than lethal tactics, pepper spray, pepper balls? Beyond that, what is the federal government's role in turning down the temperature? And the Minnesota Department of Corrections says that its own officers have been cooperating with ICE all along, handing over criminals once they serve their sentences to ICE officials. Can you concede that there is some cooperation with the state?
Yeah, look, if I was going to list the 5 agencies locally and statewide that I'm most worried about, I wouldn't put the Department of Corrections on that list. I think that while there are certain things we'd like to see more from them, they've hardly been the worst offenders. You agree with that, guys? That's a fair assessment. But I think you talked about tactics and you talked about the response to things. Look, we don't want to employ tactics that... We don't want to employ the kind of tactics that are only necessary when violence is committed against officers. That is these guys' directive, and that's what we're going to try to do. And again, you see, the president said this a couple of days ago. Whenever you have a law enforcement operation, even if 99.99% of the guys do everything perfectly, you're going to have people that make mistakes. That is the nature of law enforcement. What I do think that we...
All right, folks, we're going to close out WCNC Plus right now. We'll see you tonight for the news at 11.